Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today for the NeoLoad 4.2 feature overview webinar. My name is Jonathan Bracken. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Niotis, and I'm joined today by Steve Weisfeld. He's our Senior Performance Engineer, and he's also our Training and Consulting Lead. Next slide, Steve. I'd like to start us out very quickly with a brief introduction to Niotis and to NeoLoad 4.2. Then Steve is going to cover some of the feature highlights. He's going to quickly get us into a tour of the features to show you some of the new capabilities. And then we're going to wrap it up with a live Q&A. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A panel in the GoToWebinar widget on your screen. Next slide, Steve. For those of you who don't know us, Niotis was founded in 2005 to develop the next generation load and performance testing solution called NeoLoad. We're headquartered in France, but we also have operations here in the US, in Germany, Brazil, UK, and India. We've sold to over 1,500 customers in more than 60 countries and have grown about 900% over the past 5 years, primarily because of our innovative approach to supporting the latest technologies. Niotis has a laser focus on web and mobile technologies only, and I think we've benefited from what I would call a fanatical devotion to ease of use. But building off the success of the core NeoLoad product, Niotis now has evolved the solution offerings. Next slide. We now have multiple ways we can help companies get the results they need for their web and mobile apps. We've got NeoLoad, obviously, and for the past year we've also had Niotis service packages, which are essentially shrink-wrapped turnkey solution with software and services to quickly deliver load and performance testing results. And then of course we have professional services to provide the consulting and training to extend the capabilities of our customers with our own performance experts or from our large partner network. Now let's get back to NeoLoad and talk a little bit about what's new in 4.2. Next slide. So this is a release that we're very excited about. It's, as with previous releases, 4.2 was heavily influenced by our customers themselves through polling, survey, interview results. Our product team gathered a range of enhancement requests. We then added that to market research, and we came up with a host of new features which fit mostly into one of 4 categories. It's more collaborative and agile-friendly capabilities, which includes now a better collaboration module and continuous integration capability. We've added technology support for the latest technologies. We've got some third-party integrations, including APM, and we've got some improvements to the cloud platform in the core NeoLoad product as well. So we've added a number of features designed to directly address the requests from our customers. And with that, Steve, let's get right to it.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So first, welcome everybody. Nice to have you all with us. What I'd like to do a little bit here in the remaining time is a couple of things. There are, as we know, a significant number of folks on the call that have no experience with NeoLoad. So I want to spend a little time talking about NeoLoad in general, in addition to talking about some of the new features for those more seasoned folks on the call. I do have a few slides I want to walk through to kind of set the stage and let everybody have kind of a level set, as it were. And then we will take a look at NeoLoad both from an overview sort of point of view, but also looking at some of the specific new features of the tool, certainly the ones that are more demonstrable. So as Jonathan mentioned, we are a load and performance testing tool for mobile and web applications. Now, a few differentiators that we have, and we'll talk to this as we go through the demonstration for sure. We are the first and only fully integrated solution for mobile testing. So what does that mean exactly? There's a number of pieces to mobile applications that make it challenging for load and performance test engineers. First of all, of course, the network that mobile devices access your applications over. We've got the 3G, 4G, LTE, different flavors of those, different signal strengths. Those make it very challenging to load test. And NeoLoad, we can simulate all that kind of activity, as well as different mobile devices and different browsers on a mobile device. Another advantage that we feel very proud of here at Niotis is our ability to stay ahead of, or at least with, the technology curve. When I first started load testing in the late part of last century, there weren't a lot of flavors of web technologies. HTTP, and if you're really advanced, you might be doing some HTTPS, and that was really about it. Now, as you can see from the bullet here, we have a myriad of different types of technologies, and these continue to evolve very quickly. And it's very challenging for vendors of load testing tools to keep up with these technologies. At Niotis, we've always prided ourselves in the fact that we support every modern Web 2.0, rich internet application technology, whatever buzzword you want to use, up to date with what's going on here. Oftentimes, very much ahead of our competitors and trying to be at the forefront of technologies. And we're going to talk about a specific technology that we have support for now in 4.2, which is a prime example of that focus. Some other things that we feel very proud about: NeoLoad, of course, easy and powerful. Every vendor on the market, as you probably have all heard, will tell you that their tool is easy and powerful and the easiest to use. It's true with NeoLoad, and we actually have documented testimonials from customers of ours and case studies that we've done where our approach, which is a non-script based approach, which we'll talk about in a few moments here, is significantly faster and more productive than competing solutions. What does that mean to the organization? It means not only does your team have a shorter learning curve, but it also means you can get a lot more work done in a shorter amount of time, right? Every test engineer I've ever dealt with has told me at least one time in their life, if not all the time, they never have enough time to get all their testing done. So if I can provide the test engineers a solution or a tool that allows them to get more development done, more script development done as part of their testing cycle, that affords the organization quite a bit. I can now get more testing done in a shorter amount of time, or more testing done overall, or maybe leaving my organization more time to do more interesting things like analyze test results, tune the infrastructure of the application, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the advanced features and wizards and so on and so forth that you'll see in NeoLoad contribute to that for sure. And we have a fully integrated cloud platform. So that allows you to leverage the cloud, leverage the Niotis solution to be able to deliver your load testing in many different flavors. So we can generate load from locations which might be more realistic, more close to where your end users are really accessing your application from, but also infinite scalability. So one of the things we'll talk about as we move forward is the idea of trying to emulate the end user community that will be interacting with your application when it's in production, and being able to generate significantly large loads to model that behavior. So if you have a customer-facing application and you know that you have tens or hundreds of thousands of people using your application at the same time, you want to conduct load tests to mimic that behavior as well. So using our cloud allows organizations to be able to scale their load tests to significantly larger concurrent user as part of their load testing than other solutions as well. Very on-demand, very easy to scale your testing in a matter of moments. Some benefits, sort of a summary of what we just talked about. I won't read these all to you. You can spend a couple of minutes looking at them yourselves here, but you can see we've got a number of our customers that have exhibited or experienced significant benefits to using our tool. As I mentioned, the ease of use, the power that it brings to the table, the cost effectiveness in terms of being able to get more done with less, et cetera, et cetera. A little bit of a logo slide here, just to get a sense of who some of our customers are, but maybe more importantly, the different verticals that they come from. So we don't specialize in any one vertical or any one horizontal. If you have an application that is accessed over the web from a mobile device or from a desktop browser, and there's a concurrency when it's in the real world, then you should be thinking about NeoLoad as a test solution to make sure that you do not have any kind of performance issues when your application is in production. So I think this is a true testimonial to that, in that there's many types of different applications here: internal, publicly facing, retail, insurance, banking. It doesn't matter what the flavor of the vertical is, we'll have support and work quite well. So a little bit of an introduction onto NeoLoad 4.2, and then we'll take a look at NeoLoad. As Jonathan mentioned, one of the things that we always try to do is make sure we're ahead of the technology curve. and kind of taking a thought leadership standpoint as we release new versions. And one thing we have heard from our existing customer base is the cry for being able to better integrate performance testing with Agile kinds of methodologies, right? Functional testing has been a little bit ahead of the curve of performance testing in this regard, even though I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done with those tools as well. But from a performance testing standpoint, it's how do we get our testing done earlier? How do we get better collaboration? How can we integrate the testing as part of our build cycles, or collaboration among our test teams, our development teams together to increase the productivity of our test organization, as well as our development organization for that matter. So some things that we started to introduce now in 4.2 is improved collaboration. So you'll be able to share your NeoLoad projects across team members. Integration with some continuous integration kinds of tools, some build tools, make the DevOps guys happy now as we have a new Jenkins plugin, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Additional technology support, as I alluded to, Websocket is something that we are introducing now support for in NeoLoad 4.2, and I'll talk a little bit about the benefit of WebSocket, how we're going to see this take over the marketplace, I believe, in the next number of years, and how we at Niotis have support for this ahead of the other load testing tools that are out there. We'll talk about the monitoring aspect that NeoLoad brings to the table, and our support from some additional tiers that we haven't had support for, and some other advantages that 4.2 brings to the table. So, quick map of our technology coverage. As I've mentioned a few times already, I don't care what kind of web application technology you're using, we have support for it here. So you can see from a protocol standpoint, we support all kinds of business application frameworks, packaged applications, etc., mobile, different bandwidths. We have a monitoring support for basically any tier that might make up your application, so we've got you covered. Whatever you're building into your application, we'll be able to, performance test that, as well as be able to monitor your tiers while you're generating load. And so quickly you'll see some flashy little squares here. These are the new technologies that we've introduced with NeoLoad 4.2. So before I get into some of the specifics of 4.2, just a quick little FYI, we do have a couple poll questions, not for a few more slides, but just to be on the ready, if you could. We have a couple poll questions we'd like to run by you at some point in time to get some additional feedback from you as the audience. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about collaboration. So collaboration in NeoLoad speak is our ability to be able to share a NeoLoad project across test engineers. And so this is without any kind of collaboration, this is a big challenge in that fact that if I have multiple people all working on a load testing project together, how do I share scripts? How do I share different modules? How do I share data sets? And so historically, the process has been, you work in a silo, you work on NeoLoad or whatever load testing tool on your own desktop. When you're done, you package up your project in a zip file or whatever distributed method you want. You copy it over to your buddy's desktop. He unpackages on his desktop and then opens up a NeoLoad and he works on it. And then when he's done, he passes it back to you. With our collaboration module, that problem goes away. So our collaboration module essentially works as an SVN server that we can check in a NeoLoad project to be able to share across multiple users. Now, in earlier versions of NeoLoad, 4.0 and 4.1, we've had some beginning of collaboration in that. We've been able to share scripts and be able to share a couple other entities, but we haven't had full collaboration. So in NeoLoad 4.2, we now allow users to collaborate and share all the different pieces and parts that make up a load testing project. Some of these terms will be very familiar to folks that have experience with NeoLoad. For those that are new to you, I will get into what these entities mean as we actually take a look at NeoLoad in a short time. But what I want to convey to you is that any piece or part of a NeoLoad project is now shareable across your team members if you're using our collaboration server. It makes it much more productive, much more collaborative for the folks in your testing organization. And just a quick screenshot here. So for those of you that have seen NeoLoad prior to 4.2, you'll notice that our collaboration screen has changed quite a bit, where before we were really only able to share virtual user profiles. Now we're able to share all the different entities that make up a load testing project, including different load generate configurations, monitoring configurations, et cetera, et cetera. So before we get in now to talk a little bit about agile development and continuous integration, I do have an initial poll, that I'd like you guys to fill out if you could spend about a minute here. And this will give us a little sense of kind of where you guys are in terms of using continuous integration methodologies or tools within your organization. So just a couple more seconds here for the last folks to fill the slide out or the pull out. And let's briefly take a look at the results that we shared. And so this is about in line with our expectations. As you can see that, I don't want to say the majority, but certainly the bulk of the users on the call have some kind of continuous integration process within their environment. A significant amount of people do not know, and my guess is that if you're not there yet, you'll be going this way. Now, continuous integration, of course, is a large part of agile development methodology or flavors thereof. Of course, there are many different ways, shapes, and forms that extreme programming or agile development comes in. But the idea, of course, now being that we want to introduce our load testing to be part of our build process. We want to move it up in the cycle so that when our DevOps guys who are using our continuous integration tools to do nightly builds, daily builds, weekly builds, whatever it might be, to have our load test run as part of that. We want to bridge the gap that traditionally exists between development and QA or testing. We want to be able to run tests earlier and often. I mean, we've all heard the adage, right? Test early, test often. It saves us a whole ton of headache and money. So if we can do that now, identify issues earlier in the development cycle, that becomes much more cost effective for the organization. So ultimately what we now have is a plugin to Jenkins, Jenkins being probably the most common CI tool in the space today. We will continue to evolve this and add additional CI tools as we move forward in time. What happens now is that you will be able to access your NeoLoad testing from the Jenkins console. And I'll show you this again when I get to the demonstration, but this becomes much more effective. We can now automate our load tests, put them on a schedule so that we're executing our load tests at the end of every build cycle. As the bullet here states, integration into that process. We can compare trends by looking at build to build to build or day to day to day, all within the same Jenkins process. Good stuff. An integration that we have now with AppDynamics. Talk about that for a moment. Now, as you may know, for those of you that have experience with load testing tools, what we're trying to do here ultimately at a very high level is generate load against the front end of an application and measure response times. We want to generate different loads of different sizes so that we can essentially model what the end user community will be doing when that end user community is interacting with your application when it's in production. What we do by default is measure the response times that the end users would see. So we measure the response times for all individual requests and pages and so on. We also have a monitoring aspect, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which allows us to get information about the servers inside the application. But what load testing tools typically do not do is allow you to understand the performance inside your application. So there are a whole suite of tools out there that fall into the quote-unquote APM space that solve this problem. A couple of vendors that you may have heard of before, Dynatrace, CA APM, which used to be the old Wiley Interscope tool acquired by CA. And so these tools will allow you to do just that. AppDynamics is another player in this space. Now, as NeoLoad, we have integration into all three of these, AppDynamics being the newest one in 4.2, so that we can actually correlate what's going on from the NeoLoad perspective, from the client side, with what you're seeing inside the application. So we'll link all of our business transactions, our containers, and our pages to the results that you'll see in the AppDynamics console. So as your developers or whoever's monitoring the AppDynamics portion of your testing infrastructure will be able to not only measure or observe the measurements they're making inside the application, but be able to correlate that with what's going on the front side. So we now can get much better root cause analysis of any possible problems because we've now got it all covered. We're able to generate load from the front end, measure those response times. We're able to monitor the tiers inside the application's infrastructure to see what's going on the individual database, application server, web server, etc., but also being able to peer into the application on the app server to identify where there might be bottlenecks. So a full suite of tools to give you together gives you an entire ability to do your root cause analysis while you are generating load against your application. So again, AppDynamics, newly supported in 4.2, is now added to our list of APM integrations. Talk about Websocket really quickly. Before we do that, a final poll just to get a sense of what's going on in terms of your organizations with HTML5 and certainly Websocket being the underlying protocol there. And just a couple more seconds for folks to finish up, if you would. All right, fantastic. And let's share the results from that. Interesting. This is a very different result set. We did a similar presentation earlier in the week, and the results were completely flip-flopped. In this crowd, maybe not a lot of consideration to WebSocket technology, but maybe your organization just hasn't figured this out yet, because I believe that this is a protocol that will become significant over the years. As HTML5 becomes very prevalent, WebSocket being one of the underlying protocols as part of HTML5, I think this will become very, very important in web application development. WebSocket, of course, being a new protocol layer, if you will. It's not really HTTP and it's not really TCP/IP, but it's kind of a variant of the both. The benefit to WebSocket is it's very, very thin. So it is geared towards real-time communication. So as we further develop our mobile applications with push technologies that are delivering real-time information, real-time gaming is another vertical that will see quite a bit of WebSocket development. But I think just overall, this is a protocol that will see quite a bit of use and development in, and NeoLoad has support for WebSocket. So ultimately, what we've done is just add another protocol to our toolbox, right? As we've talked about earlier, we already support for all the technologies that are essentially out there. This is an example to me of our development team's great effort of being on the forefront or up to date with modern technologies, and so WebSocket now is something that we will support. And I think I may show a brief example of a WebSocket application just to show you how that is rendered in NeoLoad as we get through the slide deck. Additional technology support, we have something we've added in 4.2 called custom data formats, which essentially now allows you to support any kind of application technology, web application technology, regardless of whether we have built-in support for this or not. Now, as we talked about on an earlier slide, you saw that we have support for many kinds of packaged applications and many of the advanced web protocols, which are oftentimes serialized. Serialized Java, Google Web Toolkits, some of the Adobe protocols, Silverlight, etc. These protocols are very challenging for load testing engineers. The reason being is that they're just that. They're serialized. They're binary that come back and forth on the wire between the client and the application. And so if you are developing any kind of script or any kind of user profile, regardless of what testing tool you're using, it's extremely difficult to manipulate binary traffic, right? You can't read it, you can't turn it into variables, you can't validate it, there's nothing you can really do with that. So our technology support has the ability to deserialize this content. So an example, if you were a Silverlight shop and you had NeoLoad with a Silverlight module, we would actually deserialize the WCF content so it doesn't look like binary in NeoLoad. It looks like text. So you could then customize it, parameterize it, do whatever you need to do to make your user profiles more realistic. When you run a load test back, NeoLoad would reserialize the content, send it back in the right format over the wire to the application, and the application would be none the wiser. It would think that it was coming from a real-world activity. Now, with our custom data format module that we've added in 4.2, we essentially have made NeoLoad sort of open source-ish in the way that you can now build your own plugins to be able to deserialize your own custom content. So we're seeing more and more customers of ours who are developing their own binary stream. And so without an understanding of what that binary stream looks like, the problems I talked about with serialized content come to play exactly in that case as well. So now with our extension, with our custom data format, our encode decode module as it's called, you'll be able to write your own plugin in NeoLoad, obviously having an understanding about your application such that when we record and modify and mimic the traffic that's being captured by your application, we will be able to parameterize the request, extract variables, validate, do all the great things you need to do when you are working with an application. So very much, again, moving ahead and keeping in touch with modern technologies. So our custom data format module now that allows you essentially to be able to support any kind of web technology, even those that are proprietary that you haven't had any luck with when using other load testing solutions. Monitoring. So NeoLoad, for those of you who don't know, has a monitoring ability that works as such. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about our infrastructure really quickly. So a little bit of a busy slide here. But this essentially shows you what the NeoLoad infrastructure looks like. The top half of the slide is your test environment. The bottom piece of the slide is the application that we're testing. So NeoLoad comes in a couple of different pieces. There's a controller, which I'll show you in a few moments, which is where the test engineers will spend the bulk of their time creating their user profiles and customizing them and running tests, analyzing results, etc. The load generators are the guys that actually generate the load against the application under test come test time. And of course, as I mentioned, we can simulate all kinds of different network traffic. So as we generate the load against the application under test, we can simulate different kinds of connection speeds, different kind of network parameters, different sort of mobile connections, etc. Now, in addition to generating load against the front end and measuring the response times, we also have a monitoring engine which allows us to understand what's going on inside the application while we're generating that load. So it might be really useful to the organization to understand that 500 concurrent users, all of a sudden my home page performance starts to degrade significantly. That could be very valuable. But what will be more valuable, of course, to the team is why. Answering that question, why. So using our server monitoring, we can understand what's going on in these individual tiers. Have I some locking on the database? Is there a memory leak on the application server? Have I run out of available threads on the web server? Things of that nature. Those kinds of metrics will be able to be measured as part of the server monitoring. And then, of course, as I mentioned, with our conjunction and our collaboration and integration with the APM tools, we can really deep dive into the application itself. So out of the box, we have support for essentially any flavor of web application server that you need to have monitored. So we have all kinds of database support, all kinds of application support, application server support, web server support, etc. In NeoLoad 4.2, we continue to extend that. So we have a couple new kinds of servers that we support. On the database side, we now add support for MongoDB, which is sort of an up-and-coming database, very interesting because it's a non-SQL database. It's starting to find its way into application deployment quite a bit. Works just like any other database monitor that we already have support for. A key note about our monitoring. In order to monitor any server in your infrastructure, we do not require our users to install anything on those tiers. So we're a totally agentless monitoring solution, another advantage that NeoLoad brings to the table. An additional application server monitor that we support now, Kazing, is a player in the Websocket space. So we have a tight partnership now, new with Kazing, which allows us to be able to support Websocket. That's really where that technology development came out of. But also, our monitoring aspect has the ability to deliver, or excuse me, monitor the Kazing server itself. So if you have an application deployed around Kazing, not only can we support the protocol, but we can also monitor the servers as part of our load testing as well. The cloud. So the cloud is a potentially very important part of load testing. The cloud affords us some interesting things. As I mentioned, part of the NeoLoad infrastructure are our load generators. The load generators are, again, the guys, go back to the slide here quickly, that generate the load against the application come test time. Now, the load generators may be anywhere. You may install them inside your data center. You may install them in a private cloud. You may install them in our cloud. Our cloud affords the customer a couple of different advantages. First of all, it is very advantageous for organizations that don't want to purchase their own hardware to build a load generation farm inside their own organization. Maybe you don't run tests frequently enough to warrant buying the hardware, or maybe you just don't want to have to maintain it. We have cloud load generators scattered around the globe, which can be accessed on demand instantaneously, so it's very quick and painless to be able to connect to our cloud load generators as part of your test and generate load against your application using them. The second part, and I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, is the idea of geographic realism. We want to, when we are doing our load testing, make sure that the loads we're generating against our application are as realistic as we possibly can. And so one of the things that includes is geographical considerations. So if it turns out that you have a customer-facing application where your end users are scattered around the continent or around the planet, it makes sense to generate load from locations that are close to where those end users are. It gives you a much more realistic test. If you run a load test and you have all of your test users generated from load generators inside your data center, all you're really doing is testing your application as if it was being accessed by human users who are also sitting inside your data center, which is probably not very realistic. In fact, it would make for a really crowded data center. So being able to generate load from geographical locations, much more realistic. Now, cloud is not a new feature. We've had the cloud for a number of versions, but we have changed some things and improved some things quite a bit in NeoLoad 4.2. Maybe the most important thing is our cost structure. We've greatly reduced the amount of cost for using our cloud load generator. So it's now much more cost effective. There's no tiering of hours and cloud credits, etc. It's just a flat fee, becomes much easier to purchase, much easier to utilize, and much more cost effective. Some other things which are improved, this will resonate a little bit more with the folks that have experience with our cloud solution already, but we have improved our UI so that no longer you have to specify the timestamp of when your test will be over. Instead, you specify the duration of your test. Kind of a why didn't we think of that before kind of feature, but that will make test management significantly easier. And we've improved the UI quite a bit as well. We've also had a couple other features which I'll show you when I actually log into the to the cloud portal to give you a sense of what that looks like. So let's take a look now at NeoLoad a little bit. For those of you that have not seen NeoLoad before, this is the controller that I spoke of a few moments ago. So I'm going to give a quick little overview, especially for the folks that have never seen NeoLoad before, just to give you a sense of what it looks like and how things operate within the test environment. This is the controller. This is where the test engineer will spend their time creating what we call virtual user profiles. A virtual user profile is a model of what the end user will do when interacting with your application. The controller is also where we'll customize those and parameterize them to make them as realistic as possible. The runtime phase you see here is where we'll actually execute our load tests from, be able to specify how long my test will run for, how many users do I want to simulate, and then the results phase is pretty much what you'd expect it to be. It's where we look at charts and graphs and reports that illustrate how our application performed under the load we generated. So one of the differentiators, to come back to something we talked about at the onset of our conversation, one of our true differentiators is ease of use. This tree view that you see here is a virtual user profile. It is a model of end user activity. You'll notice that it is not a script. So other tools that you may have experienced with or have sniffed at before are typically script-based, meaning you have to learn a programming language or have developer types developing your user profiles. And regardless, even if you have that skill set in your organization, it's a tedious, mundane thing, and it slows you down. Programming and writing code and fighting a syntax compiler is always just a slower effort. In NeoLoad, all of our user profiles are customized and developed and maintained through these tree views. So each of these little entities that you see here correspond to different requests on the flow of my end-to-end transaction. So I may have a user log in, go to a couple pages, select an item, go to a couple different pages, et cetera, to make a purchase. These different icons, again, have different meanings. So the little blue dot is a web page. A web page may correspond or will correspond, consist of one or more protocol requests, et cetera, et cetera. And so moving around and dropping and dragging and being able to introduce logical actions, loops and branches and conditions, error handling, all done just from a series of wizards, right-click menus, drop and dragging. It's a very productive endeavor. Again, shortening up that test development cycle to be able to get you more testing done, get you to have more free time, allow you to do more with less resources. Once this is all complete, and of course you build a bunch of user profiles for your different roles through the application, different kinds of things people would be doing, you would develop what we call a population. Populations are a way to distribute the different user types, so you could have a test community of virtual users that are running as part of your test where maybe 10% are doing one activity, 20% are doing another activity, etc. Again, the idea trying to model your test community to be as close to the real world as we possibly can. But what is additionally cool about our population phase here is the ability to also modify the connection speeds at which our end users will be connecting with the application, I should say our test users. So when your application is in production, of course, not all of your users probably connecting to the app over the same kind of wire. So we want to be able to simulate different connection speeds, again, to make a more realistic scenario. And you can see that we have additional kinds of connection speeds all the way down to a 56K modem, but certainly up to fast fiber optics or Ethernet kinds of connectivities as well. Now, this is not new to load testing tools, and folks that have been doing load testing that might be on the call for a number of years, I mean, the tools in the space have been doing this for probably close to 20 years. But what is new to NeoLoad and is unique to NeoLoad is the ability we have to augment the connection speed with network considerations, network parameters. So we can actually also introduce things like packet loss or latency to give our simulation a much more realistic view. This becomes exceedingly important when doing mobile testing because, of course, as we mentioned on the onset, mobile devices have different flavors of signal strength, right? We walk around or down the street with our tablet or our mobile phone, and we go from 3 bars to 5 bars to 4, and maybe we go past a cell tower or under a bridge, and so all of a sudden our connection speeds might change as we drop from 4G LTE to 3G. We have different kinds of packet loss and signal strength issues that can definitely affect the behavior of our application. So by being able to change these parameters, and you can see for the different mobile speeds, I have the ability to model different kinds of signal strengths, really full view now, a full way to model the mobile kinds of clients that are out there. So NeoLoad, as Jonathan mentioned on the onset, in addition to being an amazing load testing tool for web applications, also is doubly amazing for applications that are accessed by mobile devices. We want to make sure we test for those kinds of activities as well. The monitors we talked about quickly, just to give you a quick overview on the kinds of flavors that we do monitor. As I mentioned, we can support and collect data from any of the tiers in the back end of my infrastructure while I generate load against it. And you can see that we have added the Kazing monitor and the MongoDB monitor, as I mentioned earlier. Again, I think maybe a key point here when talking about monitors is it is in fact an agentless solution. So when we go ahead and collect our metrics, we don't need to install anything on the DB to make your DBA go crazy, or any of your admin team members that don't like people touching their stuff. That is not an issue at all with NeoLoad. The runtime phase is where we actually specify the parameters of my load test. So we want to talk about how long my test will run for, how many simulated users, or for those folks that are new to load testing, the term VU or virtual user is the term used most commonly in the space. The idea being is that if you want to understand how your application will perform when it's in production and there are 100 concurrent users interacting with at any given time, you'd run a load test with 100 VUs. So that's how that kind of mapping works there. And of course we can specify the load generation. So as I mentioned, we have a cloud solution which allows you to pick and choose what load generators you might want to include as part of your load test in addition to the locations they might come from. So I'll briefly connect to our cloud portal. Every customer of Niotis has their own credentials into our cloud portal, and we can very quickly introduce a series of load generators to our test. And you can see that we have the ability to use load generators from many locations around the planet. And we also not only allow you to indicate which zones you wish to use and how many load generators in each zone, but we also can allow you to understand which provider we're using for any particular zone. We'll give you a sense of what their startup times are. So if you have a pressing concern, you may want to consider using different zones depending upon these values here. And so our cloud, as you can see, is comprised of many different providers. We don't want to rely on one particular provider, because what happens if you go to run a load test at 2 o'clock in the morning with your whole team and all of a sudden that provider is doing an upgrade and then you're out of luck. So the fact that our solution is comprised of many different providers makes for a much more stable solution, a much more accessible cloud solution. And then finally, when a test is complete, and I won't make you folks all sit and watch a load test, I will leave that to a further conversation, some of the results that we can get out of a load testing tool is significant. So as I mentioned, we can collect all kinds of metrics from the front end of our application in addition to our server metrics. So we'll get things like average response times. You can see we can make some really interesting charts and graphs to understand how the behavior of my application was over the course of my load test. So this is an example here where I ran a brief load test where I scaled up the number of concurrent users, and you can see that the number of hits per second increased, response time stayed about the same until we had a spike of some kind of error capacity at about 13 or 14 minutes into the test. And so we collect all kinds of metrics in all shapes and forms, and we can drill down and look at things like the 5 slowest pages, the 5 most maybe commonly occurring errors. We can look at individual pages to look at response times for all the individual pages and requests. And maybe more importantly is our ability to take our results and make some pretty cool graphs. So we can very quickly illustrate by dropping and dragging metrics onto our graph, metrics that we've collected as part of our load testing, to illustrate the performance of my application, to help me understand whether the application met its performance requirements or not. So let's say, for example, in this case, I want to understand as I increase my user load, what happened to the response time of my home page. Drop that right on there. You can see very quickly I'm able to correlate different metrics on the same graph. So there's no need ever to take our results and move them to some other kind of tool to do your graphing and your results analysis, all done within NeoLoad. And as I mentioned, because of our monitors, we can also correlate the monitors that we collected on the same graph. So if I want to pick my favorite Tomcat server metric, I could put that on the same graph as well. So I can collect all kinds of things from both server side and client side, do that analysis all within the tool. Significant. A quick overview with NeoLoad. And as Jonathan will mention when he wraps up the presentation, one thing I would like the new folks to think about is to trying the tool out yourself. A couple things actually. You might want to attend our weekly demo where we get into the tool significantly more in depth, give you a better overview of how the tool can run, but also take a look at our eval copy of the product and give it a little test drive within your own organization. But we'll talk about that in a moment. What I want to talk now about, a couple more things that are new to 4.2. As I mentioned, we have integration with Jenkins as a continuous integration tool. So this is a Jenkins interface. For those of you that are DevOps folks or have any kind of collaboration with your DevOps people, you may have seen this interface before. This is the interface essentially that they'll use to use Jenkins to execute their periodic builds. Most commonly it's a daily or nightly build, but sometimes it could be weekly or hourly, whatever it might be. So we can actually drill in through the Jenkins interface and be able to take a look at things which are specific to NeoLoad. And what's really great about using this kind of plugin is that not only are we scheduling tests of NeoLoad through the Jenkins interface, but we're actually retrieving results back. So we'll be able to, through the Jenkins controller, the Jenkins console, be able to look at the results of NeoLoad. You can see we can start to get some trend analysis going on here. Each of these enumerations on the x-axis are nightly builds. You can see the response times as they've changed over time, as well as error rates, etc. And I could drill into the results for any particular build. You can see I've got a whole history of builds that we're running pretty much every night here. And I could continue to drill into this if I wanted to look at specific errors or failures that come out of a test. I can completely get that information all within the controller here. So not only does it now integrate into my build cycle, but it also allows my results to be more collaborative because I have the Jenkins interface. It's a web interface, so multiple people in my organization can get onto the web interface of Jenkins and be able to get at the NeoLoad results. Again, trying to increase collaboration. Great stuff going on here. Additionally, as I mentioned, support for new technology, Websocket. So let's take a little bit of a quick peek at a Websocket application, just to give you a sense of what this might look like. So I have a kind of a silly little program I found on the internet, which is a kind of a Blackboard application, but it uses WebSocket technology to communicate between the client and the server. Now, typically, when you create a user profile, you would invoke a recorder that NeoLoad has, and that's how we capture the traffic that we render in these virtual user profiles I mentioned before. Our recorder is acting as a proxy sitting between the client and the application. So as I then navigate through the application, the recorder will pick up all the activity. Now, we're not a functional testing tool, so anything that we're doing here client side is not within the scope of load testing. It's not something we're interested in. It's only the activity being generated from the browser or from the client to the actual application itself. Now, because of the way that our recorder is structured as a proxy server, this makes recording very interesting because my client does not need to be on the same machine. I could have it on a different desktop, or I could have it on a mobile device. So remember, we talked about the benefits that NeoLoad has in the mobile space, so I can also record very easily any kind of application if the client is also on a mobile device. And we don't care if it's a browser-based application or a native application. If it's sending traffic to the internet, we'll be able to use a NeoLoad recorder to pick up that activity and then model it within the user profile NeoLoad. So let's go to that little WebSocket application I talked about here, and I've got a little Blackboard, and I can maybe draw a smiley face or something for you guys. And so all this activity now is being sent over the WebSocket channel to the back-end application and returned back for rendering, so that it's being captured by the recorder. So if I go ahead now and stop my recorder, and let's take a look now at the user profile that I captured. So this is their user profile that actually hasn't rendered it yet. It does take a couple seconds or two before it stops capturing, and maybe I was a little bit premature with that recording. Maybe we should try that again. Oh, here it is. It just took a second to render in the controller, and I was being a little bit impatient with the tool. So you can see I've got a new virtual user profile that I defined, and in fact, I have all the pages and all the requests that would have been generated by the client when I executed that little smiley face that I drew there. And so what's interesting about NeoLoad is that regardless of technology type, it doesn't care. So you can see the initial user profile that I had already kind of baked in the can for you before we started this presentation was a straight HTTP application. This is a WebSocket application. You can see it doesn't look any different. And that's another advantage that NeoLoad brings to the table is I don't care if you're working with serialized Java with push technologies and streaming video, or if you're dealing with a simple .NET application. NeoLoad deals with all the different technology types all the same way. All the customizations, all the logic that you might have to build into your user profiles done very much in the same fashion. Now, just to show you quickly how we actually execute a virtual user, especially for those folks that are new to load testing tools, we have a little debugger that allows the test engineer to make sure that their user profiles are working okay before we push a big test. Now what the debugger does is run all of the requests that we captured as part of our recording back against the application. What the debugger doesn't do is execute or generate or launch a UI. We're instead generating the network traffic against the application because that's all that we are caring about as a load testing tool. But if I open up my drawing application and go into this room that we started with, and once the board is loaded, I'll clear the board, and now I'm going to play back the virtual user. So all the requests that we captured are going to be generated against the application, and you'll see that the application will actually correspond accordingly. As you saw, it drew exactly what I did because of all the requests that were generated as part of my recording. So full support for the most modern web application technology out there, always ahead of the technology curve. And I think we're coming up about the end of time. I want to certainly allow folks to have time to ask some questions. I am going to present the final slide here to let Jonathan wrap up the conversation with. All yours, Jonathan.
Thanks, Steve. Great summary, I think, of not only some of the new capabilities in 4.2, but also some of the key differences that you can find inside NeoLoad. With that, we'd like to open it up to Q&A. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you want to ask a question, you can just type it into the question, go to webinar widget on your screen. But while folks are adding their questions, just I want to point out some of the resources that are available to you. You can see on the screen here, obviously, our website at www.niotis.com. You're going to see a couple of things there. There's a What's New page, which will show you everything that Steve talked about in terms of the new 4.2 content, plus some more details there. You can download a quick start guide for folks who are actually looking forward to using NeoLoad. There's a free trial. Steve mentioned, I encourage you to try out the product yourself. Give it that test drive in your organization. Check out all the different protocols, all the monitors, all that ships with the free trial, so you can check out anything. And then the other thing to point out is that that weekly demo that Steve mentioned. This will give you a bit more of a deeper dive into the tool usage itself, and give some of you folks a little bit of a leg up in terms of getting going with your trial. And then, of course, any other assistance that you need.
Jonathan, if I may.
Yeah, please.
I was just going to interrupt quickly. I apologize. On the idea of the trial, just let folks know that as you are evaluating NeoLoad, we are also here, we being the folks on my team on the technical side, we are here to help your evaluation along. So if or as you are taking a test drive of NeoLoad with your own application and you have questions or challenges or just general things you want to talk about, reach out to us at any of these contact addresses here, and we'll work with you. We like to do, I spend quite a bit of my day over a WebEx or a GoToMeeting talking to customers and prospects and having them share their screen with me and show me or show us what they're trying to do with NeoLoad. We want to make sure that you understand the value of the tool and make sure that you are successful in terms of your evaluation. So utilize us as part of your evaluation.
Yeah, it's a good point, Steve. It's not just a free trial download. It actually includes free support as well. So make sure that you have a successful trial and get any questions answered that you need along the way. And of course, any other questions, just sending an email to sales@niotis.com. You can find out more details about that. With that, let's get to some of the questions. We've got some questions coming in here. The first one I've got for you, Steve, is can we introduce artificial delays, think time, between browsing different pages? And does the report on response time consider this think time while providing performance statistics?
So a great question. So let me just back up a little bit because as we know, there are a few folks on the call that are new to load testing. So let me explain a little bit what the idea of think time is. So think time is the amount of time that your end users are interacting with your application but not generating requests to the server. So it's basically a delay. It's the amount of time that someone might be reading content on a page or filling out a form, things of that nature. And different users have different kinds of think times, right? If you come into a website for the very first time, you're probably spending more time navigating it. And if you think about a website that you go to quite frequently, you're probably moving through it now much faster than the very first time you went there. In other words, your think times are shorter. So when we are building our application models as part of a load testing tool, we want to make sure that we are thinking about the different think times that our users will be using. New users, again, typically have longer think times than shorter users. This becomes part of the realistic model. So the question is, can we introduce think times as part of our user profile development? And the answer is absolutely yes. They will be recorded by default. When you record a user profile, it will actually capture the think time of the human that was doing the recording, but then they can be customized, parameterized, randomized to make them as more realistic as possible. And the second part of the question is, does the report on response time consider these think time? And the answer is yes and no, both. It depends upon what entity you're looking at. So if you're looking at the response time of a page, it does not include think time because think times are between pages. But if you look at the response time of a custom timer, that would include think times, and perhaps it would. Depends upon how you define the container. So so the answer is it depends upon what actual time you're looking at. But the think times are a very significant part of load testing and a significant part of NeoLoad development.
Thanks, Steve. Next question is related to support for testing mobile apps. I saw what you were doing with the mobile application testing, but how is NeoLoad similar or different from Shunra plus LR? I assume Shunra plus LoadRunner.
Oh, that's an interesting question as well. So if you remember when we talked about the connection speed aspect of NeoLoad, and I talked about how our WAN emulation module allows you to introduce network parameters on top of the wire, in addition to connection speeds, to be able to give you a more realistic scenario. So things like packet loss and so on. So the LoadRunner plus Shunra approach essentially achieves the same idea, but the challenge is it's LoadRunner plus Shunra. It's two different vendors. So the Shunra approach essentially requires customers of HP, customers of LoadRunner, or whatever load testing tool is being implemented there, to add an additional mechanism on the wire to introduce these parameters. So it might be a hardware appliance, or it might be some other device that allows you to tweak the network as such. But now you're obviously considering two different vendors, two different things to maintain, becomes much more costly, where it's all baked into NeoLoad. So our WAN emulation module is already baked into our basic license. It's in the controller, nothing additional to purchase, nothing additional setup, nothing additional to maintain.
Okay. Thanks. I think we have time for maybe one more question. This is related to the cloud. You talked about using the cloud for load generation. Do you offer a controller in the cloud as well?
Absolutely. So that's the way that I described the NeoLoad architecture. And maybe I'll go back to the architecture slide real quickly here. This is the guy I wanted to bring up. So remember, we've got a few different pieces and parts that make up our infrastructure, controller and load generators. We talked about our cloud solution being very seamless from our controller to be able to add load generators from the cloud, and I demonstrated how that could be very useful for your organization. The controller itself may also be in the cloud, and we can provide that as a solution to you as well. It just depends upon sort of what your needs are. So there are many cases where customers of ours will ask to be able to place their controller in the cloud for security purposes, to avoid firewall considerations, or what have you. But yes, these pieces and parts can be anywhere, all of them. They can be in the data center, in your private cloud, in our cloud. And when I say all the pieces and parts, I mean the controller and the load generators, or any combination. I mean, you could actually even have, as an example, a controller in the cloud, some load generators inside your data center, and some load generators in another cloud. It's all very much possible. It's not grammatically correct. It's all very possible.
Fungible. Good. Okay. Well,
Exactly.
Steve, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Certainly appreciate everyone else who attended the presentation. I think we've got time for maybe one last question, and I'll just take this, and then we can wrap it up for those of you who have another minute here. While finding performance issues is great, how can NeoLoad help us narrow down the root cause, like issues with compression type, content type? One of the gray area that performance testing engineers always come across and get challenged on is configuration issue, going beyond finding problems, but solving problems.
Did you say you were going to take that question yourself, JB?
Well, we're kind of out of time here, but I think that the real question there is about getting to root cause, and identification of the issue, I think, is one part of it, and then getting to root cause is certainly another piece of it. And I think one of the the questions that everybody has is, what's the purpose of it? And I think you started to show that with some of the correlation analysis that you were doing live there with some of the monitoring and infrastructure monitoring data, along with the application performance data. So maybe just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the three pieces together are kind of where it comes together. When I say the three pieces, you've got sort of three different sets of measurements we can get out of NeoLoad. Certainly, out of the box, the tool provides our performance classics. That's the first piece. Then we have our monitoring aspect, which allows us to get the server-side metrics. That's the second piece. Coordinating those two together, really valuable, very helpful in understanding some root cause issues in the application's environment. But then the third piece, which is the integration with APM tools like Dynatrace, CA-APM, and now AppDynamics, allows us to now deep dive into the performance of the actual application itself. And so being able to coordinate all three of those pieces together, there's your root cause analysis.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Steve. I realize we've gone a few minutes over, but I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. And as Steve mentioned earlier, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions, either about the presentation you saw or about any additional next steps. You can always send an email to sales@niotis.com, and we'll make sure we get it to the appropriate person. Thanks very much.